Mary Lou, thanks so much to you and the club for inviting me to speak today. I don't really have much to say, so I made something up. I got this interesting invitation. It was like, well, we heard you did a lot of stuff, so why don't you tell us about it? So I think that's what I'm going to do. And let me change a couple of things here. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope I don't scare people too much. But here is the title of my presentation today. I'll let it sink in for a second.
You're not sharing yet.
I'm not sharing. It says you are screen sharing. Can people see the screen or not?
We can see it.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, so it does say here. So anyway, I've done a lot of weird stuff in my life, and I guess the real story here is how did this kid turn out to be the guy that you see on the screen now? It's unbelievable. Born in San Francisco, pretty much stayed in the Bay Area for a lot of my life and went to New York. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about a couple of the different major jobs I've had over time, which is, as you saw on that screen, everything from punk rock DJ to private eye to UN peacekeeper to community college hack, and now communications analyst for Lafayette. And then at the end, I'll take questions on any of those professions, everything, the trade secrets of being a private eye, what really goes on in community colleges. I might tell a few stories about the city of Lafayette, who knows? So if that's okay with everybody, I'm gonna rip through this thing and then we'll take the questions at the end. All right, cool. Anyway, as I said, I was born in San Francisco, second generation San Franciscan. That's out on Noriega Street, way, way out near the Great Highway back in probably 1960, 59, something like that. And then my folks moved out to Alamo. There's the young man in high school. I got to tell you, it was kind of a big move moving from San Francisco, the foggy sunset, to Alamo in the middle of winter, middle of summer, in 116-degree heat. As you can see, I had a full beard and a big Jew fro, and I just didn't fit in, because in those days Alamo was kind of horse country, and a lot of folks had gun racks and pickup trucks, and they thought I was a hippie and a freak from San Francisco, and BART wasn't running, couldn't see my friends, but met some nice people, including Darcy there, who was my girlfriend in high school and in college, and we're still friends now. She lives in Walnut Creek, and we stay in touch. That's kind of cool. Then I went to SF State, and I cut my hair a little bit, shaved the beard off, eventually shaved the mustache off, as you can see. And I was really into radio back then, in the punk scene, and I was the first punk rock DJ at San Francisco State's radio station, KSFS. And I remember I walked in one day when I started school there at San Francisco State, and I said, "Oh, hey, do you guys have a punk rock show?" And they were like, "No." And they're all these hippies, long hair and stuff. And I was like, "Well, I tell you what, I'll do a punk rock show." And they said, "Do you have your own records?" And I said, "I do." "Okay, you're hired." Well, not hired. I got credit for it, but anyway. So kind of got into the punk scene back in the late 70s in San Francisco. Here's a picture of me with Debbie Harry and Chris Stein of Blondie behind backstage at, I guess this was at Wolfgang's. Anyone remember Wolfgang's back in the Embarcadero? So I think that was that show there. So that was kind of fun years. I went to art school, got a degree in photography from SF State, fine art photography. We'll get to that in a second. And then I dug up this picture, which is a way too serious photo of a young man as a private eye. I really dig that Minox camera I had. And I moved to New York. I used to work in San Francisco. I worked for Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe as a paralegal. And then I moved to New York with Orrick. They were opening up a litigation department there. They had a bond practice, and I was the paralegal that went out to open the office. Unfortunately, the partner decided he did not want to live in New York, and they didn't ever open a litigation office. So I found a new job as a private investigator for an international investigative firm called Kroll Associates. Some of you may have heard of them. Quite a large firm, and it kind of pioneered the whole idea of the corporate investigators. But I worked on some real big cases. This picture's from Argentina. I worked on a case that went undercover in Argentina. My cover got blown within about 24 hours. But for a case where Merv Griffin was being sued by his former bodyguard for, ready for this, palimony. I don't know if you guys remember this story back in the 90s, but Merv Griffin, I didn't know he was gay at the time, but he was, and he had lovers, and he had this one guy as a lover, this guy claimed. And he claimed that the lover did, let's see, bodyguard, driver, lover, he claimed that he picked Vanna White for Wheel of Fortune, so therefore he should have half of the earnings of Wheel of Fortune. So we did a big international investigation on this guy. It ended up in Argentina involving polo ponies, and the case was thrown out of court because the guy took the Fifth Amendment on importing polo ponies for illegally, and you can't take the Fifth Amendment when you're the plaintiff in the case. So it just shows you that you should hire private investigators to dig up all kinds of weird stuff. I also worked on some cases when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. We worked for the government of Kuwait and dug up a bunch of stuff on Saddam Hussein. We did a big expose on 60 Minutes, CBS News 60 Minutes, on all the financial holdings that Saddam Hussein had, including a major investment in a Bible company in the United States, which kind of shocked everybody. That was kind of a fun case. And then I worked on the largest libel case in Canadian history, which involved a Canadian Jewish family. They were very, very wealthy, one of the richest families in the world at the time. They owned Financial Center in New York, World Trade Center in New York, parts of Yerba Buena, major developments, Canary Wharf in London. And they were accused of dealing with the Nazis during World War II when they lived in Tangier in Morocco. And of course, being a Jewish family, that really hurt. And the author of this story that purported this stuff dug up a bunch of OSS documents in the National Archives. So I spent 3 years going back and forth between Morocco, Tangier, London, interviewing people all over the place, including ex-OSS spies, CIA folks. It was a fascinating case. And that's one of the things I'm going to do in retirement, is kind of recreate some of those stories. So that was fun. So then I don't know what got into me. I decided that wasn't exciting enough, and I decided to join the United Nations as a public information officer and help them set up radio stations. And it started in Cambodia. This is just a few photos. This is part of the slideshow that I gave when I originally came to the club. And of course, the slide projector didn't work back then, so some of you may not have seen this. But I worked for the United Nations, as I said, and got a nice diplomatic passport, which you can see up there, which is kind of cool, except the Americans don't ever recognize an international passport. And it's funny, I was one of the few Americans in UN peacekeeping. It's interesting that there just aren't a lot. In those days, the U.S. wasn't paying its dues to the United Nations, and a lot of the folks are Canadian, Brits, Australians, and the troops come from all over the world. And it was kind of a wild scene. I'll tell you, I was in Cambodia for the first election, set up a radio station there to help with the electoral process. And then that went so well, apparently, that the UN decided to send me to former Yugoslavia and Bosnia, and that was a hot war. I mean, Cambodia, we had a couple of massacres here and there and stuff like that, but it wasn't like a real war like in former Yugoslavia. So that was pretty intense. My apartment got shelled, people were killed. It was the real deal. And so I was helping to do press conferences there, and also trying to set up radio stations. But if you've ever tried to do such a thing in a war zone, people take setting up radio towers real seriously, and they like to blow them up. So we decided to not do our own radio station, but to produce programming and distribute it to existing radio stations, which had all that. I'd be happy to elaborate on that if you guys have questions. It was a lot of interesting weirdness. Then I went on to Rwanda, and I think some of you may recall that there was a genocide there where 1 million people were killed in a very short amount of time. And then there were 4 million people displaced, and they all went to it was then Zaire, to refugee camps in Zaire, and the UN had no way of getting information to them. They were dropping leaflets out of helicopters, and it was a terrible scene. So I quickly put together a deployable radio station, and then we dropped radios and loudspeakers in the refugee camps, and were able to get information to them. And it was one of the few times I saw the international community and the United Nations come together and actually do something in a very short amount of time. Within a month, we had this thing going. I mean, in former Yugoslavia, it would be months and months and months of nothing happening at all. It was very frustrating. But in Rwanda, I think people felt so guilty about it that they came together and really got this thing going. But I tell you, it's not a glamorous life. You can see you get jammed in there with a whole bunch of peacekeepers in a cargo plane, and these people, you know, and me too. I mean, nobody gets a chance to shower because there's water shortages, and you're on a plane cramped in like that for 6-7 hours. It's not a lot of fun. And then down here, this is my sleeping quarters in Rwanda, just a mat on the floor. Kind of funny. So anyway, so I did that, and then, let's see, where else did I go? Yeah, Angola. That was quite something. So I decided I didn't really want to continue doing that sort of lifestyle, and I came back to the Bay Area after being overseas, and I worked as a consultant for a while, and then I got a job with the local community college district over on the, now I can say on the other side of the tunnel, the Peralta Community College District, which had, and it was a very similar job to what I had with the UN. It was just, they weren't really shooting bullets. Well, they do sometimes in Oakland, but it was, doing the PR, doing the publications. They had a TV station. I built a radio station there, which is where I do my punk rock DJ show now. And it has 26,000 students, or did then. It's really shrunk in recent years. And it was pretty interesting. I taught a class there on social media at Laney College. And then I love this shot. One of the trustees took this. I had to go to all the trustee meetings, just like the city council meetings. And here I am here, and behind me, I love this. No, just no. Just no. That was a big theme in a lot of meetings. Just no on everything. But this was a giant board meeting, I said city council board meeting, when the A's were proposing to build their stadium at Laney College. Some of you may remember that a few years ago. And the whole thing became a complete fiasco. It was a mess. So I blew the whistle on some stuff at Peralta, and I retired from there with a nice pension from CalPERS. And then I joined the city of Lafayette. And I gotta tell you, I've been with Lafayette now for just over 3 years. It's been a heck of a lot of fun. I have enjoyed almost every minute of it. I might not have enjoyed it at 1:45 a.m. when the city council is still going on, but short of those really, really long meetings, it's just been a blast. And I sort of wish I had gotten into city government earlier, because I'll tell you what's interesting. I mean, I work for the United Nations, a big government, but international organization. I work for a big community college district, which is one of the largest in California, part of the California community college system. And these are big organizations with a lot of bureaucracy, of course. But then at the city of Lafayette, it was like, wow, it's a small group of folks who are really, I'm not just saying this, but are really dedicated, all really smart, not a lot of bureaucracy at all. It's a get things done kind of environment. And it's really interesting because there's all kinds of stuff going on, from political stuff and political discussions about development and all those, legislation, to, we got to fix the potholes, to PG&E, to wildfires, to ceremonies like this. I think this was Terry, I think this was your ceremony for Citizen of the Year, if I don't recall. I was taking pictures of that one. And it's just been a lot of fun. So anyway, that's all the weird stuff I've done. Oh yeah. So, as I said, I graduated with a degree in fine art photography, and so in retirement, I've got literally thousands of negatives that I've never printed. I mean, you just didn't have time. You took a lot of pictures, and I never printed them. So thanks to digital technology, I don't have to breathe in weird chemicals in a darkroom any longer. I can do it now digitally and scan them in. But I'm planning to go through a bunch of my work, do some new work as well. And just, print up a lot of those pictures that I just never had a chance to do. And also, when I was in former Yugoslavia, I think this picture down here, it's archival stuff. Right before I left, I went into an old photography shop in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. And I'd always loved the shop because it looked like it hadn't changed since the 1940s. And I asked in broken Croatian if they had any old negatives, stari negativi. And the woman there said, come back in a couple hours. So I came back and she handed me these boxes of negatives. Everything from glass, big glass negatives from the turn of the century to 35 millimeter film shot through probably about the 70s. And I've always wondered, I started doing this, but I never got around to finishing it. scanning these negatives. And the photographer, I mean, this must have been the city photographer for Zagreb. It has everything from births, deaths, famous people visiting the city, street scenes, all kinds of portraits like you see there. So I really want to finish that. And I have, again, thousands of negatives of those archives. So that's something I'm going to work on. So with that, I will take any questions on any and all of those topics. So go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away, or I'll just shut up.
Jeff, it's Pat Hart here.
Hey, Pat.
I just have to tell you that I loved the photograph when you were standing there with your trench coat and the collar turned up just right.
Yeah.
What a classic shot.
Thank you.
For an undercover agent.
A gumshoe.
A gumshoe, yeah. It's funny, that whole life, I mean, there's like that picture looks cool, and going undercover in Argentina is kind of cool and stuff. But I got to tell you, a lot of the work is, and remember, this is before the days of the internet. For the most part, we had Nexus, Lexis, and some very sophisticated databases. But a lot of the work is going through documents, going to archives, going to courthouses, business records, and then trying to piece together, connect the dots of who these people are and what they're doing. A lot of boring, and then you sit in cars for hours and hours and hours peeing into a can and all that business. So it's not all the dashing intrigue, although some of it was. Tangier was quite a scene, I got to tell you.
Hey, Jeff, two questions for you.
Yeah.
First question is, what was the most rewarding job that you've had?
That's an interesting question, Larry. I mean,
it's not a trick question.
It's public information officer for the city of Lafayette.
No.
Well, so I'll say this. I think I found something in each of those jobs, and it's pretty similar. Seriously, what Terry was saying, I have really enjoyed working at the city, and I'll tell you what's rewarding about it is you can see immediate results. And people call up, something's bothering them, and if you can get it fixed, it feels really good. You accomplish something. That's really nice. Education tends to go on and on with 25-year plans, and then by that time nobody ever graduates. But that's kind of rewarding, to be in the classroom. I love teaching folks. That was really rewarding. And I got to say, when peacekeeping works, like the elections in Cambodia, where they had like a turnout of like over 80%, and they were really free and fair. And it was the first time people had ever voted. I got to tell you, I still get goosebumps thinking about those 3 days of elections in Cambodia, where people dressed up in their finest, their best clothes. And we used to dip their finger in this ink that would last for 3 days, so they couldn't vote twice. And they'd walk down the street holding their finger up, proud that they voted. I'm getting goosebumps.
Great. That is a great story.
So yeah. my second question is regarding your archival work. I mean, I have become our family's historian, and I've gone through and scanned thousands of photographs, and trying to piece together who these people are and where they were is a daunting task. I mean, you've got these that are from a particular region, but is there any notation of who some of these dignitaries or these people are? Is that one of your goals, or tell me more about this? Yeah,
so thanks for asking. Some of the negative sleeves, especially the bigger ones, the 6x7 negatives, have notes on them, and they're written. A lot of them don't have anything, especially 35 millimeter. I'm not so interested in finding out every little detail about stuff, although, I have a lot of friends still in Croatia from my war days, so some of them have helped me out and trying to figure out what is what. I'm kind of more interested in presenting something like, Yugoslavia, a country that doesn't exist anymore. Here's what it was like. And I'm trying to kind of keep it in the spirit of the way the photographer took the pictures, trying to really scan them and print them, as it were.
In the moment.
Well, in the way that I think that person had in mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. And then I think Troy had one too, but go ahead, Jamie.
Well, Troy, do you want to go
Oh.
first?
Oh, sorry, it's Andrew. I think Jamie.
Yeah,
also-
and I have one too. I'll get in line.
Okay.
Me too.
I'll go. Jeff, in your long title to this presentation, you mentioned community college hack, and I was just wondering if maybe you got that wrong in the long title, if it's communication director, community college, and a City of Lafayette hack, and what makes you less of a hack now than your community college work days?
Well, that's a great question, Troy. It's funny. I mean, everyone, when you're the spokesperson, right, for an organization, everyone calls you, a hack or a flack or something like that because they think you're spinning for the organization. And, to some extent you are. But I think what finally for me at the community colleges, it just, when you have people that were lying to you and then you go out and tell the press that lie and you didn't know it was a lie, I think that's where you got to kind of draw the line. But I will say this, I think every organization deserves, like they deserve a lawyer, every defense team needs to be there for somebody, public defender and all that. I think everybody needs to be able to tell their story. The one thing that I draw the line on about that is like, oh, I won't lie, and I'm not going to say I don't know if I do know. So I try to, I've always tried to be really honest with reporters. I know what reporters need. And I'll always say, look, I'll try my best to get you that information. Or you go on background and say, look, and you got to trust the reporter to do this. And these days, reporters aren't the same as they used to be. But you got to say, look, I'm going to tell you why we can't really go public with this right now. And hopefully they usually play along. And I've had to do that in Lafayette a couple of times. Like, hey, here's the story. We're not hiding anything, but here's why we'd rather kind of wait a week or something like that. Does that help, Troy?
Yeah, that was a longer answer than I expected.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. That's part of being a spokesperson. The other technique is that I learned from you and spokesperson is if you don't want to answer the question, just keep rambling on. And then they'll just give up.
Spoken like a true politician.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. Okay. Who was up next? Was it Andrew?
I think Andrew was next and then me.
Okay.
Then
and
me.
then Terry. Yeah.
Get in line, Terry.
I'm in line.
Just keep your pants on, Terry.
So
Don't get out of line.
In your slide from your days at the UN, you had one picture there which was like completely out of place, which was the kind of the backyard butchery. What is the story behind that photo?
Wow. Okay. That's pretty cool. Well, you know what that was? So I was in Rwanda. That was in Kigali, the capital. And, it was really a weird scene there because everyone had basically either been killed or had left except for the militia that kind of took over. And here was a capital city of like 1 million people that felt like a ghost town. It really was a ghost town. And there were a couple of, peacekeeping folks there but no real locals, but different relief people and stuff like that. I think there was one, so we were eating, meals ready to eat for the most part. And there was one restaurant that was kind of opened. It was sort of weird. And to prove that the food was good, they would butcher the goat in front of you. And
Whoa.
that is a picture of a goat being prepared for a meal to make. So you knew it wasn't hopefully diseased and rotting. It was about as fresh as it could get.
Mhm.
But thanks for asking, Andrew. Okay, Jamie, I think you're up next.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you have a potential shelf full of books, memoirs, stories to write and tell. Which one are you going to do first?
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, and that is one of the things I'd like to do. Well, actually, the first thing I'm doing, and I've already started working on this, is working on a podcast about my private investigative days, and specifically a guy I worked with whose name is Tom Corbley. He was this kind of shadowy figure. It's a longer story than I want to get into now, but I think I'm going to start with a podcast. I'm sort of into radio thing, and apparently the way it works now to screenplays and books is you start with a podcast, then you go to a book and a screenplay. So I think I'm going to start with that, and I want to tell some of those private investigative stories for sure.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for asking.
Let us know when the podcast starts.
I sure
Definitely.
will. Yeah. Terry.
Yeah. Jeff, regarding the podcast, make sure you email Blast Rotary so we can follow you.
Yeah, it's going to be months. I mean, we're negotiating with Audible right now. It's going to be a ways out. So keep your fingers crossed. I'll have some good news.
Okay. My issue is Rwanda. That's one of those historical events that has always bothered me. I'm going to tell you what I know or think I know about it, and you can straighten me out.
Okay.
You know, the Hutus and the Tutsis went after each other. I can't remember which one was which.
Yeah.
But the scenario was horrible. And I am of the opinion that had a couple of battalions of special forces or Marines, US Marines, been dropped in there, they would have, if not stopped it, slowed it way down. I talked to I have a cousin who was the Irish ambassador to the UN at that time, and I asked him about it, and he had no answer, or actually he didn't want to answer it. What I've read is that the Clinton administration, after Somalia, did not want to get involved in Rwanda at all. How come the UN or someone else, maybe even the French or the Europeans, step in? It's a small country. It seems like something could have been done.
Yeah, well, wow, Terry, that's great because, you know, I mean, I can talk about this in a lot of detail, and I don't know how, I don't want people to be glazing over, but that's a great question. And of course, people have been trying to answer that question for a while. But you're right. After Somalia, the United States did not want to commit any boots on the ground, right? No peacekeepers on the ground.
So that was the decision, the foreign policy decision?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So logistics, they would, you know, the US would, and sometimes I talk, you know, I'm American, but sometimes I say the Americans, because that's when you work for the United Nations, you talk about it that way. But anyway, so the United States at that time wouldn't commit any troops on the ground in any peacekeeping mission, but they did contribute logistics and support and a lot of intelligence. And they also had people, I don't think I'm giving anything away here. They did have people, mostly NATO officers, who were embedded in these different forces, and they were basically collecting intelligence for the U.S. as well as providing usable intelligence. Things changed a little bit in Bosnia, but in Rwanda, what happened was, you had the French, because it's the former colonial, well, Belgium actually, former colonial power, but there was a thing with France, they all speak French. And you had the Canadians who were there as a peacekeeping force. Now the US doesn't drop in Marines, that's not how it works. That's a different thing. But what the US can do, or what other governments do is they do provide troops. It's not like the Marines, it's a UN peacekeeping force. So, and that's a whole complicated thing, and it's a moneymaker for nations and this and that. But there were no American troops in Rwanda until after the genocide. And that picture, oh man, I don't know if I have it there. So what happened is, so the French were involved, the Canadians, and they were completely overrun. It was a complete disaster. I mean, they did not know what to do. They didn't have any kind of the firepower that would be needed to stop anything like that. They didn't have the mission mandate to do it. And that's part of the thing that's weird about these peacekeeping missions, is you have a limited status of forces agreement that only allows you to do certain things, and they didn't have it. So the massacre took place. And then, as I said, all the big powers were like, oh my goodness, how did we not stop that? And then the Americans sent in, I don't know if they were Marines. I think it was actually infantry. It might have been Marines, and took over the airport. So when I landed, it was American controlled, which was a very nice thing to see. And they took over the airport because you had to get stuff in there in relief. And they basically took over the country and started this process of rebuilding. And you're right, that's what probably should have happened earlier. But you know, there just isn't the political will sometimes to get these things done until it's too late. One aside, I'll make this really quick. So I came in, and Americans had the airfield. It was a great thing to see with these big, C-1 cargo planes everywhere, and it just felt good. And these mobile radars and stuff. And I'm in, and then 2 weeks later I go to leave, and I came back later on. And when I left, they had some Rwandan authority there at a passport desk. And he said, passport. So I gave him my laissez-passer at the UN. He said, you don't have a stamp here. I said, you weren't here when I came. So it was pretty funny.
Good. Thank you, Jeff. Thank
you, Jerry. Anybody else? Or we'll turn it back to Mary Lou.
Well, I have a question for you, Jeff. Did you ever feel that you were personally in danger in any of these places?
Well, people ask me that often, and I mean, I did, but it's one of those weird things. I think if you're the kind of person that is fearful, you probably wouldn't be there in the first place. But I think the thing that happens is a lot of times, you go and you just do what you need to do that day. And when you get back to either your apartment, or I remember once specifically, I went down to Sarajevo, and Sarajevo was really I'll tell one more story in a second, but there's a firefight that goes on, there's a shelling that's pretty close to you. I remember I once flew into Sarajevo and they shot at the plane. And then you go to bed at night and you're like, wow, that was pretty close. You think about it later. I don't know if you think about it at the time. That's kind of funny. So just here, let's end on a kind of a light note. So in Sarajevo one winter, I was at a party, and that was kind of one of the weird things is, we had a good PX for the UN. So Sarajevo was under siege. People are starving. They're being shot by snipers, but I could go down to the PX and get some champagne and chocolates. It was just bizarre. And so we'd have these parties with the international folks and stuff, and a lot of reporters. And one of the parties was behind what was known as Sniper Alley, which is the main drag in Sarajevo. And there was a very famous New York Times reporter, Roger Cohen, who still reports out of Paris. I think he's the Paris bureau chief now. And he was covering the war then. He was, I think, the European bureau chief. And he was at the party and all this stuff. And he left. And we're leaving the party later. And there's Roger face down in the snow. We're like, oh my God, Roger's been shot. And then someone goes, well, there's no blood. Is he all right? He was just drunk and fell over. So I got scared of those things. All right, back to you, Mary Lou.
Okay.
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jeff. Well done.
Yeah, very interesting. Loved it.
Well, I hope we're going to be able to see more of you too, because we didn't get to see you every week this year. So hopefully you'll be able to join us next year. And anyway, I know Lafayette's better than Orinda. So as far as our Rotary is concerned, we've done an awful lot this year. So we'd love to have you stay with us, of course.
Thank you.